So, thank you for being here this last session of the 2015 Teaching and Learning Conference. We want to do something different now. In the past, we usually had 3 days of conferencing, listened to keynote speakers, workshops, presented our papers, and went home, and life remained the same. And so this year we said to ourselves, this conference is actually quite an expensive event. We're using taxpayers' money to fund it. Surely there has to be some consequence, some outcome. And so we said, is it possible to derive some, what do we call it, Michael? Harvesting actions. Can we derive some possibly action plans, some signposts, something that we can take home to ponder over and then go back to our classrooms and our offices on Monday morning and convert that into some sort of action that makes a difference to our scholarship, that makes a difference to the institution, and makes a difference to the academy. So what's happened over the past 3 days is while the conference has been in process, we had what we call strand coordinators who were tracking various presentations and feeding their impressions, their notes to Professor Michael Samuel, who's done what I call action mapping. So what he's going to present to you today is a action synthesis, if you like, of the conference, and that presumably is going to give us some sense of where the next conference should be heading. I hand you Michael Samuel.
Thank you very much. The raised expectation of what the session is going to do just accumulates every time I hear it. So I hope that I will at least do some of the harvesting that I'm suggesting in this particular presentation. And I'm going to have to go rapidly so that it just stimulates what are the possibilities of how we could write up a presentation of this and feed it back to you in the UTLO website. So as Rabi already alluded to the methodology of how we engage with constructing a series of responses from a wide variety of participants, I'll declare them soon, and then to start to look through what are recurring constructs that emerged across the conference, and the sub-bullets are some of those issues that we categorize them with respect to the following issues. And as you look through that list, you can ask, where would you locate your own presentation? In which sub-bullet would you recommend your own contribution that you made at this particular conference? We had for the first time a specialist strand in the form of health sciences, and that will change for the next conference, as opportunities exist for different colleges to be able to mark their territory or mark the kinds of issues that they would like to engage with. Whether we've done this adequately are questions that are going to recur in this discussion. I will then work to action steps or action harvesting, and you can see these are many different labels that we could use to describe the conception of what we're trying to do here. It's not a set of declarations. It's not a set of resolutions. It is a set of walking through the future, of trying to ask what should rise or fall as our considerations as we engage moving forward. How do you develop some kind of traction? Or as one participant in the conference said, how do we develop a grittiness? Not just student grit, but maybe academic grit. How do we engage with this process of attraction? It's not going to be complete. It's not going to be all exhaustive. But nevertheless, it's partial in terms of how it was constructed. And perhaps there are opportunities for refinement or elaboration of how this process could be engage with in the future. But the key word that came through is very often I heard, we want some real action, as if there's unreal action as well. But nevertheless, we're talking about some visible change that a lot of individuals are arguing and pushing for. We need new redirections. And that real actions are what I'm going to be drawing from the over 30, 40 pages of notes that came my direction at 4 o'clock this morning to try and pull together what this all means. So I hope I'm going to elaborate this adequately in suggesting that this is not about what any one particular group thinks, but a whole range of individuals think. And it's very clear that the vantage of who's speaking prefers certain directions above others. And my intention is to represent all of those in this particular discussion, to suggest that's the menu of possibilities. And increasingly we're seeing how a recurring theme that comes for me is how many individuals are disillusioned that we need new policies or new directions or added directions, which then raises the question about what the conference is. This is the competent team of individuals that fed through these 40 pages of notes to me to be able to make sense of it, including I was ambushed last night by the students in the group to say, we're doing a lot of talking about students, for students, the curriculum, about the program. Where's the students' voices? And so the students confronted me and said, these are what are the issues that we would like to hear in a conference on teaching and learning. So well done, students, to actually push us to be able to ask whether only academics talk about them in the designing of our curricula. And I'm going back to the conference title, and it's quite a mouthful now that we think about it, because it's got so many possibilities, even the word possibility in it. But it asks the question, how could we reimagine? And so quite clearly the issue of imagination, of thinking anew, imagining the possibilities. But it's asking the question, and I hope that this presentation is going to answer, can policy learn from practice? Because what emerged in the discourses that seem to dominate in our reflections is that more individuals concentrated on the first two elements of the theme of this conference, the complexities and the challenges. And we didn't spend enough time talking about what those possibilities are. And I think that's where the question about how do we create the format of a conference where we don't create opportunities simply of talking about what's not working and what the constraints are. How do we design structures of a conferring of minds that move away from a litany of complaints towards a litany of possibilities? And I think that's the challenge of any conference theme, that when we invoke complexities and challenges, then we start invoking the litany of complaints. So, recurring notions, and here's the issue for me. If somebody woke me up at 4 o'clock and asked me the question, can policy learn from practice? The reflections are simply answering, strangely, no. And I'm going to be controversial in saying that, because it's saying if practice is as we have currently a set of habituated rituals, then we're not going to learn from practice. We're not going to be able to currently engage with the reconstruction of the practice system. And instead, what we're seeing here is that a lot of discussion is about practice is too constrained, it's too embattled, it's too weak. We don't have the pragmatic definitions to be able to, or the resources to be able to change it. It's driven by constructions developed elsewhere, maybe to look modern, to look as if it's emulating the status fetish of disciplines or contexts external to our present context. But I'm arguing that that's not the nemesis of practice, that it is its very resource. The fact that what we have is a set of complaints about the contested nature of the curriculum is its very strength, because what we have to develop then is a theory-led understanding of practice. And this seems to be a discourse that a lot of the participants are asking more and more for. How do we develop a syntax, a vocabulary to be able to engage with the world of operation? Not just simply to be engaged with practice, but to be engaged with a theory-understood practice. And I think this reinforces the theme generally to ask the question about, are we creating sufficient opportunities in our conferencing to have the power to redefine and to reimagine possibilities? So these were the themes of the conference with that specialist focus, and these were the kinds of issues of the key threads of the conference that engaged with us. The asterisk issues were invited keynote speakers to be able to activate those different dimensions. And you can see some are better activated by the keynote speakers than others because of the choice of the topic. Nevertheless, I'm going to be arguing that here's what we see as three recurring systemic issues. The whole debate about what does it mean to be in the 21st century, and that is a recurring debate. Increasingly, it's not only about issues of ICT. It's about where are we in an uncaring 21st century? Where are our ethics of care and construction, of respect and value? And the definitions of transformation and differentiation becomes the next issue, where the next set of issues are about moving beyond just the fetish of status ranking on one end of the continuum, and how to be able to work towards undoing an alternative and presenting an alternative. An attempt to develop a rethinking about what we mean by genuine collaborations. The movement away from a dialogue, if I could spell it correctly, okay, away from judgment to a dialogue of issues. So let's dealing with access issues, dealing with issues about globalization, internationalization. How do we develop? All of these seem to be coming from largely a systemic debate around the realignment of the post-secondary education system in a post-apartheid South Africa, in which we're asking, are we sufficiently spending enough time of the relationship between universities, universities of technology, and the TVET system to begin with? Or do we reform only from within our own sector? Is the challenge that's emerging. The curriculum issues are issues that are emerging with respect to debates around technology, pedagogy, restructuring, and the debates about language issues. I'll end in the presentation to argue that I do not think we saw very much new in this particular area. We had more descriptive accounts of what's going on in these particular areas. We've heard the debates about, for example, habitus and capability and cultural affirmation, etc. But are we actually moving the discourse beyond what we already know in this particular area of the curriculum reform? So how are we going to then activate an alternative curriculum possibility? If we're listening to repeated presentations of things we already know, are we moving the discourse beyond what we don't know? And for me, here's where the innovation of the conference came. I have pages and pages of individuals saying, let's rethink our values, what we understand to be our values. And so these kinds of questions in the yellow box come out as the dominant themes to be able to say, This will activate a new, deeper theoretical understanding which will inform our conception of where we're moving to the forward. Do we understand these definitions of what it means to be radical, to move beyond a colonial consciousness, to move beyond imitation to innovation, to believe in courage, compassion, and conviction? Central to that whole section of recurring mantras that emerge in trying to establish what constitutes our value is an understanding of a very simple four-letter word: care. How are we displaying our ethics of care at various levels? At the level of structures, at the level of systems, at the level of curriculum. How do we translate those caring considerations to include elements of both national and local, blurring of boundaries, different disciplinary dialogues, transdisciplinarity, issues of being unburdened by the heritages of our past, and beyond just simply attempting to imitate inflated meritocracies. So you can see why in the conference we saw many workshops trying to ask for how we do this in a different way. Alternative forms and representational forms in the research endeavor became a recurring mantra as well, as we start looking across the workshops, the reflections on the workshop. Beyond borrowed measurement regimes, beyond just simply imitating methodologies that have become habituated in our disciplines, attempting to move conference beyond just a talk shop of keynote presentations. Because increasingly what the reflections were saying, are we wasting our time? Not apologies to the keynote speakers. Are we wasting our time just listening to a rhetoric of the kinds of debates of presentation formats, or maybe presentation performances? And I'm not critiquing the individuals, I'm critiquing the format. Whether that format actually generates deeper conferring. Is it generating the quality of interaction? And it seems like that the alternative so-called fringe activities for the conference are generating the deeper discourses that people are looking for. The TV version, the engagement with the workshops, the dialogues that happen outside in informal settings. How do we take what is at the moment on the fringe and bring it into the center? This is what is seemingly a recurring mantra that's emerging. So I'm just going to label now some theoretical recurring constructs that have emerged. Across the abstracts, across the presentations, the construct of disruptive innovation. If you don't know these terms, these are the action harvesting that we need to moving forward. What these mean. How are you going to take these issues forward? And what is the responsibility of the planners and organizers for a next conference around these kinds of constructs? Breaking the bounds of colonial consciousness, blurring boundaries, dialogues beyond sustained isomorphisms. I hope some of these things are strange to you, because that's the debate. Do we know what these things mean? Because these are the ingredients for building blocks for alternative reconstructions. I love this one, quality beyond surveillance. How do we understand quality beyond the mantras and the regimes of accountability? Developing grittiness as a construct. How are we engaging with alternative interpretations of how do we work in the face of the many odds that are stacked against one? Developing an ethics of dialogue, care, and respect. We have these mantras very often in our vision statements, but how do they translate theoretically into our actions in the classroom? So I want you to focus on the verbs of these values that came through. Unburdening, breaking, moving, being, developing, harvesting. All of these are suggesting a set of action steps that individuals need to take responsibility for redefining and reimagining. There are too many to go to in detail, but they continue. And now I'm focusing on the nouns. Caring pedagogic settings, intellectual courage, beyond mission and visions. We don't need more policies. We don't need no education. Pink Floyd. Define what you want to be. You define what you want to be. Don't be defined. Promoting professional learning communities of respect, principles of quality, collective responsibility. Images that also emerge as principles. Research should be a feature not just of the postgraduate sector, not just at certain levels, but also in a differentiated education system across all programs. Rethink our status fetish, rethink our models of funding and the responsibility of the private sector with this respect. Having courage of conviction, inherited practices, moving beyond our pedagogy of inherited practices. Self-knowledge. I'm just going to go through a series of structural issues that you can see, of issues that people are arguing for new directions with respect to systems. I'm not going to go through each bullet because each of them were emphasized by its speaker, but I want to concentrate on the fourth bullet. Have we got the basics right? A lot of debates around the end point of the educational enterprise. The construct of not just about education being about self-advancement, but also about advancement of service to others. Okay, I love this interpretation of internationalization. Where does I feature in South Africa in internationalization as an image? To be able to start asking what's the relationship between the national and the international? How are we seeing the quality agenda being constructed elsewhere and imported in? Is it that we have to capitulate? What are the possible opportunities? These are some of the questions that came around imagining internationalization. Or is this just a mythical aspiration of being able to work outside of the international discourse? Okay, I'm going to skip to some reflections on the language stream, where it's quite interesting that the reflectors there suggested that this was an underrepresented and insufficient focus of the conference. It simply did not do enough. And yet it is a key agenda of the UKZN reconstruction. We only had, says the reflector giving me notes, you can agree or disagree, we've had one keynote speaker, a Teach TV panel on the issue, and 4 papers. Is this adequate as a response to the language issue? Of course, the question was, should we have a dedicated SIG, special interest group, as a thread that runs throughout all conferences across teaching and learning? Are we timing our conferences adequately, because this is overlaid with other language symposia that are going on in the national system, which might have attracted others in a different direction? How do we time our conference? How do we raise awareness about language issues? And there were some possibilities there of how that could be done. How do we use technology to do this? How do we form new partnership with those who are already doing what we have? 2 minutes. Okay, so in the health sciences, the argument is how do you work in an inter-stakeholder representation issue, and how do we address the health systems needs of the issue? Okay, with technologies, the debate was very much on, we often see students merely as recipients of the curriculum rather than activators of the curriculum. And these are some of the issues that were raised about the nature of the student responsibilities. Okay? And the vast amount of resources that are available but are not actually tapped and used in our curriculum. Okay, the use of games is the next issue. So I'm going to skip this issue on the alternative issues and instead look at action steps for the conference. The first one is to think of the conference as really a space for conferring, beyond just simply the traditional formats of keynote speakers reporting or presenters presenting on their studies, and creating more opportunities for a deeper dialogue. The need to engage the student voice is an issue that we note its absence in our curriculum program. The debates that we see here, I've commented on how we activate innovation, how we activate a deeper theory-led pedagogy, how we debate conceptions of models of higher education institution financing, how to develop issues around early career academics is an important part of that systemic session. But I want to end with this particular provocation, arguing it's not a matter of more policies, it's not more of the same with respect to conferencing formats. Instead, what we should be doing is developing new vocabulary, a language of description that broadens the debates around what it means to join higher education, to be part of higher education. We need to be looking at methodological innovations to produce authentic data, and the emphasis there on the word authentic data, to consider the possibilities of more than one methodology and more than one paradigm to reimagine the higher education system. It's the interconnection between the confluences of multiple forces that will produce the deep theory-led direction that we could. The next is looking at how we displace the lecturer, the sage on the stage, to be able to ask, and how are we bringing our student voices into the discourses about curriculum reconstruction as we engage with theoretical and practical ways of really listening to the roads must fall, not just using it as symbolic discourses. But how do we understand what is the substance of the critique that students are offering as they engage with the curriculum system? The challenge that was suggested here is to let's interrogate how we've fetishized also these concepts such as access, excellence, quality, innovation, transformation. What's happened is there's a hijacking of whose definitions matter. And what we need to be looking at is opening up the possibilities of imagining new definitions. And that responsibility is not the management's, not the students, not the academics, but all of us collectively redefining and reimagining our possibilities. Thank you very much.
You will agree with me that that was spectacular. I do wish we had time to engage further on this. Regrettably, we do not. And I beg your indulgence for a few minutes more while we pay gratitude to quite a few people who made this conference possible, notably yourselves, who've come from various parts of the globe to grace this conference with your esteemed presence. Thank you. All right, I have to be brief, so let me say no more about that. Thanks to the keynote speakers for providing provocative thought leadership. And you've given us much to consider, and particularly much to consider about how we engage you in the future and what alternative models of engagement will generate most efficient knowledge production. Thank you to our ICS department who has provided all of the AV support. In particular, I want to thank the acting director, Abdullah Sharif, is he here? A fine gentleman who's very, very responsive to our many demands. Thank you, Abdullah. Thanks to corporate relations, and in particular Raylene, and to Karen McGregor of the University World News. Thanks to the conference committee. Their names are listed on page 32, so I won't repeat them here. But it's the strand coordinators, really, who've made all of this possible. Deep word of gratitude to you. Also for what you've done to enable Michael to deliver his synthesis. The colleagues, thanks to my office staff, the teaching and learning office. And in particular, you might not know this, but we are the tiniest executive office in the university. All of this was made possible by 4 members of staff. Of course, we do have research interns, thanks to them as well. And I want to single out, with your permission, 3 names in particular. One is our conference manager, Collier Ogle. Is she here? She's always the shy one, works in the background. She's been absolutely phenomenal because 2 of our staff members were in hospital during the crucial conference preparation period, and she really literally took the reins and took over. And then the 2 interns, the research interns, who've been just amazing. One is Ibrahim. Please stand up, Ibrahim. Ibrahim has managed the entire IT provisioning for the conference, and he's also been the producer of Teaching and Learning TV. And he was ably assisted by Lungelo, another research intern. Is Lungelo in the audience? So typically Lungelo, he's busy doing something out there which none of us would do. Thank you, Lungelo. Forgive me for not mentioning the others. The names are too many in this short time. And then we have the blue shirts, the student assistants. I know that you've really benefited, or you are grateful for their presence in showing you around, in ushering you, in addressing your needs. And somebody who's become a familiar face at this conference, but whose voice we very rarely hear. We started for the first time listening to it last night. Tintin, please show your face. For those of you who were here last night, Tintin took full control of the entertainment for this conference with absolutely no direction from me. And also to the TV production team, particularly Vanji, who's the producer, and her team. And with regard to the TV production, all of the keynote addresses, some of the workshops, and all of the TV panel sessions will be available on YouTube. And as soon as they're ready, you'll receive links in your mailboxes. And of course, we currently have quite a store of other resources which we've developed from last year's conference and all of the seminars that we host regularly at UKZN. Thanks to Professor Michael Samuel for taking on this task. When I first approached him, I did it with absolute guilt because I knew he would say yes. And knowing full well the enormity of the task. Thank you, Michael. You're ever so generous. So what we're going to do is circulate Michael's slides to you, the action mapping slides, for refinement. Michael, do you mind having them send their responses directly to you, or would you prefer us harvesting them and forwarding them to my office? Okay, so if you would forward your responses to UTLO at UKZN, that's the generic UTLO website, one of my staff will then collect them and forward it to Michael. To our charming hostess of the TNL TV, Professor Sarojini Nada, who never fails to amaze us with her intellect. Thank you, Saroj. And of course, sitting next to Saroj are her lieutenants. Thank you also, Nena and Saras. And finally, I want to say, on your behalf, ladies and gentlemen, thank you to Professor Renuka Vital, our DVC Teaching and Learning. I want to say thank you to her for giving us the space and the inspiration to experiment, to fail, to innovate, and succeed. And I dare say that this was one of our successes. So, Ibrahim will play you a little snippet of what seemed to have gone on during the past 3 days. So this is the UKZN Teaching and Learning in Higher Education Conference. It's an annual conference that brings together delegates from around the world to articulate their thinking on contemporary issues on higher education, research and institutional research. In the past, we hosted the Teaching and Learning Conference at one of our university campuses. Over the years, the number of delegates has increased exponentially. The conference was hosted at the Ilangeni Maharani Hotel, which is located on the beachfront, the Golden Mile of the Durban East Coast. The conference comprises approximately half of the delegates who come from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and having exposure to the other half, who are international guests, provides a sterling opportunity for a reality check about where exactly UKZN is at in relation to contemporary debates, the extent of our own innovation, the quality of our scholarship, and how we can benefit from the expertise that can be shared with our guests from elsewhere.
So far it's been wonderful. It's been a great introduction to South Africa and to the educational system and some of the challenges. A lot of dynamic situations and actually an opportunity for great change.
Teaching and learning and research are the cornerstones of any university's core business. The conference provides the opportunity for delegates from various parts of the world to come and showcase their innovations, their findings of experimental studies, of new approaches, of how technology is used, to share ideas. The key theme underpinning the discussions at the 2015 conference was whether policy can learn from practice. And we're asking critical questions from our delegates to demonstrate whether in fact we should be shifting the gaze from policy to practices that inform policy. Notably, we have Professor William Tierney from the University of Southern California, our own policy specialist from the University of Witwatersrand, the Vice Chancellor, Professor Adam Habib. Our third keynote speaker, who happens to be the new CEO of the Council on Higher Education, the CHE, Professor Naren Bejnath. So aside from what you would expect at a usual typical conference, That's the keynote workshops and paper presentations. In 2014, we introduced something of an innovation called Teaching and Learning TV. We extend the debates further where academics are able to insert their own scholarly agendas into these discussions. So these conversations that are recorded in the studio are then converted into YouTube videos, which we post onto our website, which is then accessible to the international academic community.
There's so much innovation happening in the area of language development in higher education, particularly that we are moving from policy to practice. For such a long time, these things just remained on paper, and now we're seeing with the wonderful work being done by these scholars that actually we might move into a new era in higher education where African languages become the center of the focus, and we use it as an intellectual language and not just for conversation.
The interest in South Africa, and as Stephen Harrison himself pointed out, shows that there's much happening, much which may be perceived as negative. But within every negative situation, something emerges that could be potentially new, because there are things happening around the world which shows dysfunctionality, shows complex adaptive systems struggling to harmonize. And they can learn from us. The fact that we've got this kind of speaker, this kind of philosopher, author in an academic conference is probably unheard of anywhere in the world.
At gatherings such as these, we get glimpses of hope and glimpses of how other institutions are managing student protests, for instance, around issues of funding, around issues of progression rates, around issues of quality. You would have noticed an omission. Professor Chimundu was not included, and that's because this video was cut last night. Apologies, Professor Chimundu. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. It's now lunch, after which please travel safely to wherever you are going. Thank you very much.